Ever since it was announced back in February, information has been relatively scarce on Amazon's Conan the Barbarian series. In a July 27th interview, however, showrunner Ryan Condal provided a wealth of new information, which answers many a fan question. In this video, I will first go through all the new information Condal revealed, all while putting it into its proper context for those new to the world of Robert E. Howard's Conan. Then I'll analyze the original Conan story upon which the pilot episode will be based, the FrostGiants Doctor, and finally address the frequent concerns that Conan may be watered down to cater to modern political correctness. Before any of that though, let's go through a very brief crash course on all things Conan. The original Conan stories were novelettes written by Texan author Robert E. Howard from 1932 up until his death in 1936, and they were originally published in Weird Tales magazine. The stories follow the life and times of Conan the Cimmerian, from when he was a teenager discovering the civilized world outside of his tribal homeland for the first time, to his reign as king of one of the greatest nations of his age, the Hyborian Age, the age of unknown prehistory between the sinking of Atlantis and the beginning of recorded history. Conan himself was written as a noble savage, uneducated in terms of formal schooling, but equipped with a natural cunning, a moral code, and skills gained from a harsh life lived. Narratively, he functioned as a mirror in which the dark side, double standards, and hypocrisy of civilized society is reflected. The stories were reprinted in various collections from the 50s onwards, and their popularity led to the Conan comics by Marvel from the early 70s onwards. The popularity of these comics in turn led to the 1982 feature film, helmed by John Milius and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. While the movie is great cinema in its own right, it remains controversial with Conan fans, as it takes massive departures from both the original stories and the comics inspired by them. I will explore this in greater detail in the upcoming Conan the Barbarian retrospective. The 2011 Conan reboot, starring Cole Aquaman before he was either, was initially announced as and intended to be a fresh adaptation of the original stories. But alas, head honcho Avi Lerner of production company Millennium wanted a straight remake of the Milius movie, and he had quite some pull, being the main bill payer. And so, the movie ended up a Frankensteinian abomination, stitched together by the corpse of the Milius movie, the very worst of the comics, as well as some lines lifted from the original stories, thrown in here and there for good measure. In the original announcement for the Amazon Conan series, it was said to be closer to the source material as well. But that was said about the 2011 movie back when it was announced too, which clearly didn't happen. Will the Amazon series stay true, or veer off course as well? In a July 27th interview with Sci-Fi Wire, showrunner Ryan Condal, the writer of Rampage and Hercules, as well as former showrunner of the cancelled Colony, left little doubt that the upcoming series will indeed be a new adaptation of the original Conan stories by Robert E. Howard. These are stories he clearly knows, and based on his choice of words, would seem to understand. Condal told Sci-Fi Wire that by now, the Amazon series has already been 2.5 years in the making. Furthermore, he wasn't approached about being the showrunner on an already in-development series. On the contrary, the whole series came about by him being the one approaching rights holder Pathfinder Media and pitching them on how a Conan series could be made, and things fell into place from there, with him landing the position as showrunner. Condal's approach is that over the course of the series, he wants to chronicle the life and times of Conan by on-screen retelling all the Conan stories in chronological order. To tie the stories together, many of which were set years apart, Condal has added a serial element. In his estimation, half will be very faithful to the original stories, half will be new material, but still in keeping with the spirit of the original stories. As a fan, I am perfectly fine with that. That is, after all, the same approach that was taken with both the Marvel Comics Conan as well as the 2004 Dark Horse comic reboot. About Conan himself, Condal describes him as an Apache warrior who's left his tribal lands. He comes out into the world of civilization, sort of attracted to it. Then he sees a train being built and train tracks and understands that my world, the world of my people, is ending, and I either need to find a place in this new world or I'm not going to be around anymore. The description of Conan as an Apache is obviously intended to get the point across to those not familiar with Howard's Conan, and as such, I have no issues with it. Howard envisioned Conan as a proto-Celt, living off the land in a tribal community in what amounts to the prehistoric stand-in for the Scottish Highlands, so the comparison is not an altogether bad one. But the part of the quote about his world coming to an end, I do have issue with. Conan's land is still there in the original stories, very much so. He left them primarily because of his lust for wandering and for seeing the world. As such, I hope that Condal doesn't mean that Conan's tribal homeland is no more. That was true for the Apache, but not for Conan. I hope that what Condal means to convey is that Conan has ventured outside the borders of his land, and he must try to adapt to the outside civilized world and its ways which are alien to him. That would be very much in line with the original stories. Condal went on to say that he had so far written the series Bible and the 3 first episodes of the first season, and he announced that the first episode would be based on the original story, The FrostGiants Doctor. The FrostGiants Doctor was written back in 1932, but not published in its original form until 1953, almost 2 decades after Howard's death. It has been adapted into comics by both Marvel and by Dark Horse to kick off their reboot of the comics. Go with the Dark Horse reboot on this one. There is wide agreement among Howard scholars that this is the chronologically first Conan story, set before he travelled south to the civilized lands and empires of his age. In the FrostGiants Doctor, Conan has travelled further north, to Nordheim, the Hyborian equivalent of Scandinavia. There he is teamed up with a band of Aesir, and as the story begins, he is the last survivor of a battle between the Aesir and the rival Vanir. Wounded and barely conscious, Conan sees Atali, a sensual, virtually naked woman of otherworldly beauty, alluring him. Needless to say, it's a trap. As far as the original Conan stories go, the FrostGiants Doctor is by many considered one of the weaker ones. It was even rejected by Weird Tales magazine. It does, however, illustrate why Howard is a writer who inspires such a loyal following among those who get his work. The story is inspired by both Norse and Greek mythology, with Atali being inspired by the Greek Atalanta, and with the roles of Conan and Atali being a partial reversal of the roles of Daphne and Apollo. In addition to the FrostGiants, the Aesir and the Vanir are both different tribes of gods in the pantheon of Norse mythology. What little we know of Norse mythology today was written down long after Christianity had taken over as the dominant religion of the region, and the way the records we do have are worded suggests that the Aesir and the Vanir may once have belonged to 2 separate prehistoric Nordic systems of belief, the followers of whom were probably in combat with each other, until their gods were united in one overarching Norse mythology. It is not even wholly outside the realm of possibility that the Aesir and the Vanir may once have been actual tribes living in prehistoric Scandinavia. That is the approach taken by Howard, and how he went about creating not just this story, but his Hyborian world in general. Although Howard himself never traveled too far away from his native Texas, he was exceedingly well read in both geography, history, and mythology, and used all of that to retro-engineer the world as it might have been thousands of years prior to the onset of recorded history. For this story, he used the Vanir and the Aesir and the FrostGiants of Norse mythology and treated them as real inhabitants of his Hyborian age. Within the context of Howard's stories, they would be forgotten with the passage of time, and in the distant future of this world, which is still in our past, they would only be remembered in legend and in myths, in Norse mythology in this case. A recurring theme in Howard's writing is the conflict between civilization and barbarism, and how fleeting and vulnerable civilization is, how mankind can be set tumbling back, forget past achievements, and have to begin the long crawl back to civilization again, ignorant of what was before. Just as the Hyborian Age represents our forgotten prehistory, the Atlantean Age represents the forgotten prehistory of the Hyborian Age. Graham Hancock would probably approve. But let's get back to the topic at hand, and something a great many are concerned about. One worry that many have expressed since the series was first announced is that Conan may be watered down with a heavy dose of soy in his wine, so to speak. That is to say, that his character may be altered to make him more palatable for the current outraged culture and to cater to contemporary American political correctness. To be clear, Conan is a gentleman of the really old school. He will not insult someone unless provoked first. He will honor any agreement or commitment come hell or high water, and he will always leap to a woman's defense. Speaking of which, he will never take a woman against her will, but there was one time he came close, and that was in the FrostGiants Doctor. The one controversial aspect of that one story is that it represents the one time Conan, however dazed and confused he may have been at the time, however much Atali might have seduced him in advance, was intent on having his way with her, even without her consent. This is kind of a key aspect of the story, and there would be very little point in adapting it at all if it wasn't included. The story itself is a pretty forgettable one in the life and times of Conan the Barbarian, so that Condal chooses to include it in the series at all suggests to me that he won't shy away from controversy. Now, to be clear, I don't want to see Conan rape anyone, which again, he never did or even came close to except that one time, but that Condal is even willing to include it suggests to me that he may be willing to bring forth other aspects of the character as well, namely those which some extremists might mislabel as toxic masculinity. Because Conan is the ultimate alpha male. He is the biggest badass there ever was. A Conan done right is a Conan that burns with life, that loves, that slays, and as long as he does that, is content. That is what I hope we will get, and nothing said so far suggests that that hope isn't warranted. But there is always the matter of changing management. Amazon went after Conan in the first place because Jeff Bezos wanted in on that Game of Thrones audience. They already got Lord of the Rings, which is Amazon's crown jewels, but more family-oriented. Conan is more suited to bring in the adult Game of Thrones audience. But after Amazon had placed a 2-season order for Conan the Barbarian, and after the series was announced to the public, Jennifer Salke, former NBC head honcho, was appointed to take over creative leadership at Amazon Studios. Will she allow Conan to be the barbarian he always was? In an interview with Deadline Hollywood, she makes it clear that Amazon will emphasize big-budget sci-fi fantasy series like Lord of the Rings, and that she would like to see something addictive aimed at women, like The Handmaid's Tale, and something else addictive aimed at young adults. She has reiterated the importance of diversity both in front of and behind the camera on numerous occasions, yet she hasn't mentioned Conan by a word in any interview given to date, so her thoughts on that are a complete mystery. Will Condal be given free reins for the 2 seasons Amazon have ordered, or will the series be subject to certain demands or restrictions? That is too early to tell. It could go either way. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.
If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel Midnight's Edge After Dark through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes Making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.